Hello there, and welcome to this session on the Metaverse. We're particularly interested in the analytics and the data piece regarding the Metaverse. Now, you may have heard of the Metaverse. It's becoming increasingly popular, and we often discuss it in science fiction, for example. However, it is now becoming a much more important part of our daily lives through social media and also through marketing efforts as well. So what does that mean for your business? How can businesses survive and even perform effective digital transformation when they have to consider the future as well as the present when they're thinking about metaverse technology? So how does the metaverse fit into a business strategy when futurist ideas are not yet formalized, and how can we deliver these in reality? How can we do this if our business intelligence is not up to scratch either? So in this session, what we're going to do is have a think about the metaverse, what it means for us in terms of the data well. How can this really help us to do well for our businesses? And not just that, but to stay ahead of the competition as well. So about me, my name is Jennifer Stirrup. I'm a thought leader and data strategist. I'm also a #1 best-selling Amazon author, Fortune 100 global speaker, and one of the top 50 global data visionaries. It is my pleasure to be here with you today to discuss this in more detail. So what is the metaverse? Well, we could look at it as some sort of persistent 3D digital clone of the world. Now, it goes by many names, and you may recognize some of these: the world's digital twin, the parallel digital universe, mirror world, or even the magicverse. Now, according to research conducted by Citibank, the virtual world could be the next generation of the internet, and the groundwork has already been laid for that. So today, for example, cloud technology exists to provide the processing power and the storage to help businesses to be successful in the metaverse. They can offer extended reality and immersive interfaces as well. We also see that networks that leverage 5G are becoming much more mature, and we're also seeing the convergence of cognitive abilities and technology such as computer vision, speech, and also deep learning. All of these things together mean that user experiences feel very real. On top of that, we've also got the current trend of decentralization, and that involves things like finance and the economy and supported by blockchain. So this is making partly automated financial systems possible and also facilitating decentralization. Finally, we also have digital native consumers now. Now, the pandemic has had a real impact on consumption, and that's really helping people to think more about virtual products and experiences that they might find in the metaverse. And the groundwork has already been laid for things like sensors from our smartphones, social media, digital devices, and we also see that digital data-driven companies are at the top of Fortune 500. So there's a lot happening all at once. So it really is the time for the metaverse to come into play. Altogether, this is called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, also known as 4AR. And the AI-driven society 5.0 has seen such a great change in humanity and progress in the last 50 years than we've seen in the last millennia combined. So I know I've hyped up the metaverse, but is the hype founded? Well, the total addressable market, or TAM, for the metaverse economy could be somewhere between 8 trillion and 13 trillion by 2030, with up to 5 billion users, and that's according to research by Citi. In order to respond to that, organizations such as Facebook are really adopting the metaverse. So much so, in Facebook's case, they actually rebranded as Meta. And this means together that the metaverse is part of some ahistorical hype cycle. And we see that because brands are coming into the metaspace, the metaverse itself. And we also see futurists like myself pontificating about what the metaverse might look like for most people. You do come across naysayers who say things like the metaverse is something that nobody really wants and it's a solution looking for a problem. However, we do know that millions of people across the world have already been cultivating and thriving in digital worlds for decades now. For example, Second Life, remember that, has over 600,000 monthly active users, and every day 200,000 people access Second Life, and that's been in play for almost 20 years. I bet you that makes you feel old. It certainly does me. So how does the metaverse start to fit into a business strategy? Well, the thing is that metaverse concepts are already relevant to businesses. The main thing is always about the consumer. What does your customer want? And that's regardless of the metaverse or AI or whichever technology you're trying to look at. And we have to remember the metaverse isn't simply a solution looking for a problem. Every business is a tech business, and every business is a data business. So there's always room for digital transformation, continuous transformation, and disruption. We also have to think about marketing as well. For some organizations, the metaverse is going to be a key channel, and that will be a really important point for their marketing mix. So you'll see companies starting to develop more omni-channel strategies, and that will involve marketing, customer experience, and sales. And all of these things together need to start to include the metaverse and virtual reality. Now, the metaverse itself, what we see is companies will become metaverse native, just like we used to talk about digital native or cloud native companies. So these are distinct from the traditional bricks and mortar presence that we used to see. And where organizations are now having to think about being online and not simply just bricks and mortar. And the metaverse may have the same impact as well. So we may start to hear the phrase metaverse native. So what does that actually mean for traditional businesses? Will people get left behind? And will companies get left behind as well? Now, when something like this comes along, you'll see competition, and that's just the way that our economy is set up. And what we can envisage is that companies that get there first will have an advantage. They will be the groundbreakers, and they will own the space. It also means we may see that organizations that are larger are much more able to cope with trying to get into the metaverse space. So there is a real privilege for larger organizations who can afford to take on the risk and to fail fast. So, for example, already companies like Nike are working on VR branding, and that will fit into what they envisage the metaverse to be. This really means that the laggers may not survive. But what about people? Well, people get left behind. Now, this is a really interesting question for the ethics. For example, how do we protect the most vulnerable? We already know that there are obviously problems online. What does that mean for the metaverse? We also have a concern about the digital divide, where poorer people are much likely to be subject to technology rather than having a choice whether they have the opportunity to participate or not. So what metaverse will do for traditional businesses, it will be very interesting to see what happens, but it no doubt will start to set out more competition as well. So all of this sounds great, but what are the risks? One potential item to think about is infrastructure. I know from my experience building data strategies for a few decades now that companies don't always look after the data very well. People often have little data sources which are really important, and they are actually focusing on really crucial data sets that are very important to the business. Often they can be sitting in people's laptops or perhaps hiding in email. But these little data sources are the ones that people are using to make business decisions every day. So who's going to pay for this infrastructure? It obviously involves 5G, and we also need to think about how does data from the metaverse sit with data that we already get from websites and our customer data as well. So what we really need to do is to start to think about frameworks that will help us to incorporate data from big data sources and help to align that with what we see coming from the metaverse as well. Leading on from that, there may also be privacy concerns as well. In Europe, many people don't understand GDPR still, and we have some concerns, obviously, that the metaverse may be really driving people taking data and people not really understanding what the data is being used for. I'm thinking about Facebook again and the issues that they were part of a few years ago with Cambridge Analytica. People didn't really understand what was happening to their data. And I can see that there will need to be a real education around what people can do with their data and how they know how it's been used in the metaverse. That's difficult enough in the current day and age at the moment. So privacy really involves gaining the users and the customers' trust. If they don't trust you, they won't use your services. It's very easily lost. So if I were you, I would think about data privacy for the metaverse right from the start. How do you reassure customers what you are doing with their data? We also have the difficulty of understanding what user engagement actually looks like. So it will primarily be 3D in the metaverse. There may be 2D versions as well, and there may be desktop editions. So what we do see, for example, perhaps potentially due to the pandemic, virtual reality headsets, their uptake tends to be quite low. We also find some of them, the cost may be too high for general users. So that may mean that there has to be a change in the way that organisations consider their devices in order to encourage people to start to think about using the metaverse. Different users may not cope as well with virtual reality as others. For example, we need to consider things like the accommodation of the eye, which is not always as easily fooled as other parts of the perceptual system. So people with eye conditions may not respond quite as well to it. So we need to think about accessibility as well. We also have some more things to consider in terms of other risks. Now, I mentioned earlier that blockchain is part of how we think about the metaverse. The decentralization of finance really helps to enable the metaverse. So one other concern is the value of crypto. Now, if business transactions are taking place in the metaverse, they may well be leveraging the blockchain. And that could be through non-fungible tokens, NFTs, or it could be through cryptocurrency as well. We know that can fluctuate throughout the day, and that could mean economic issues in the metaverse itself due to the lack of stability. Also, if you invest in an NFT, then it may not quite be as solid or stable as a real world trade. So we need to think about what does that look like in terms of the metaverse and what's the impact of that. So your organisation may have to start thinking about how do you work with cryptocurrency, if you do already or if you don't, what does that mean for your play in the metaverse? We also think about portability as well. So if you have a metaverse native business, you might find that your subset of people you work with, your customers, just maybe a small subset of the larger population of customers that you have. So how do you work with both sets of customers? Do you treat them differently? How often can you try to be sure that you're serving both sets easily and well? One way to do that is to be so focused on your customer data. And again, that can mean that you have to think about aligning it in some way. I'm not advocating putting everything in one data store necessarily, but things should line up. So you may have to start thinking about a data mesh or a data fabric, and perhaps using the data vault methodology in order to help you to put everything together in a way that's very well governed. So we also have to think about decentralized metaverse. Now, a true metaverse tends to be thought of as being very decentralized, where nobody actually owns it, and there's complete transparency in the process. However, that does mean it's difficult to regulate. We already have that problem with the more general internet at the moment, so how that shapes up for the metaverse is not quite clear. So what does data actually mean for the metaverse? So a few things that I think are really important to start to consider. One is that with the metaverse, your data could be coming from different sources. So how do you work with that? You may find that you're already not copying with your data in your organization already, and that can make life difficult. And now you're adding on data from the metaverse as well. So you have to think about, how do you cope with this as a big data source? Where are you going to put the processing, and where are you going to put the storage? Then we need to think about, how do we put that data with the rest of your customer data to understand what the customer really wants from you and how you can serve them best. Now, organizations can get very bogged down in trying to join their data together and perhaps losing sight of the bigger picture when it comes to the data, which is all about being customer focused. It's very easy for people to become derailed by going down one rabbit hole when actually maybe that is a dead end and they need to fail fast. Your digital transformation strategy is really about innovation. How does your organization regard innovation? What do you do when you try out new projects and new systems? What do those look like? So if you overanalyze, for example, and don't try to get started, then perhaps you're losing some innovation along the way. We also can use data to help us to think about efficiencies and inefficiencies in the process. Really understanding the customer really means that you have a good understanding of their data, they can trust you with it as well. So if you find that your organization can't get descriptive statistics correct, or you're not able to produce good business intelligence with what you have, then it's going to be really hard for you to start to think about adding in additional types of data, say from the metaverse or other big data sources. So with that in mind, try to be efficient with the business intelligence that you have right now, and make sure it's all got that purpose in mind of somehow serving the customer better. Now, we can't always get perfection, but we can aim for progress. And if you can use your data to help you to understand your customer better, then that will be a good thing, regardless of whether you're using the metaverse or not. So I mentioned Facebook earlier, and I thought it might be useful for you to have some insights from what you can see Meta are recommending that you do. So there's a few things. One is the metaverse, according to Facebook or Meta, will be co-created through businesses, policymakers, and creators all working together. So this may feel like a slightly unusual partnership. Note that they don't actually mention introducing new technologies. I think the idea is that the metaverse would be used within their platform. So what does that look like? Well, Facebook have always championed themselves as being at heart trying to help small, local and medium-sized businesses. So what they suggest the first use of the metaverse will be is to simply promote your business. So, for example, they say that things like shopping on virtual reality could help to increase your rate of sales. It's all about awareness. They also encourage businesses to become much more present in terms of the digital presence. So obviously to use Facebook, things like Instagram, Messenger, so on and so forth, but really to review your digital strategy. So that's a good takeaway, I think, because it may be the case that people get very excited about the metaverse, but are not looking at belts and braces first. What have they got in place more generally around this strategy? How can that be improved and set you in the right direction for thinking about metaverse and also artificial intelligence applications as well, as they may converge at some point too. So a few tips and tricks to get started. One is to get meta savvy. Get familiar with what the metaverse is. I gave you some other names for it earlier. So just understand, what does it mean really, virtual reality? What does the metaverse mean? What other names is it known by? And there's plenty of information about that on the internet. We know that people are talking about this topic quite a bit. Also, meta skills. Get very fluent in data, regardless of whether you're using the metaverse or not. If you are not familiar with data visualization, you really need to start to get accustomed to that. It's a way of conveying the message in the data, and if you don't get that right, it could obscure the data, and we don't want that. I'd also suggest setting up a Metaverse Centre of Excellence. That's really about getting the creators, the technologists, the business people, and the policymakers around the table, helping them to understand each other better. It also especially includes Gen Z, digital natives as well, Gen Z, digital natives, depending which side of the pond you are on. I'd also suggest setting out a metadata strategy. Really think about doing a gap analysis, understanding where you are and how you could improve in terms of your data particularly. A good data strategy will help you to do that. Think about what digital transformation really means for your business. I'd also suggest getting MetaTech. So this is all about security and compliance. These things will never go out of fashion. How can you be sure that the privacy of people's data will be protected? This is really important stuff because it's very easy for people to lose sight of the fact that they need to do these things in order to be successful with the latest and greatest technology, regardless of whether it's AI or the metaverse, for example. I'd also consider extensibility as well. Now, what we see is the interoperability perhaps not being there for the metaverse at the minute. And that should all be about moving seamlessly from multiple experiences to multi-experiences. So people should be able to move from experience to experience in the metaverse and do that very seamlessly. And that will require a new decentralized architecture for the internet, so a bit of futurology there. And for that, people are moving towards Web 3.0. Innovators are currently working in this area already. So what we're thinking about is the metaverse leveraging all these technologies I've just mentioned, everything from blockchain through to security to Web 3.0, and also thinking about 5G as well. How can all of these things be put together to be successful in the metaverse? So a quote here from William Gibson, a science fiction author. He says the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So we have to think about the ethical side of pieces as well. How can we make the metaverse fair and ethical and transparent in terms of the data use? How can we make sure it's something that's good for people? Now, if it's used properly, it can be so helpful for your customers in terms of your customer experience. It could also benefit employees as well. And it can give you a whole new realm of digital products and services that your business can offer. But belts and braces first, get your data into a good shape. And all of this, the heart of the metaverse is really the data. It's a big grab for data. That's what's going to happen. So that can really benefit your business, but you have to protect it and respect it wisely. So with that in mind, a quick summary. I hope you enjoyed this session in the Metaverse. It really is really crucial for you to think about it in terms of good data. Are you sticking to good data engineering principles now? Are you able to get good business intelligence? What's your data maturity like? All of these things are really important, and if you're not working on them now, well, it's a great time to start, okay? Because the companies that were most successful in surviving the 2008 financial crash were the ones that had their data in order. It will never go out of fashion. So with the metaverse particularly, new data sources and new AI algorithms can mean this can get confusing quite quickly. But if you've got good testing as well, that will really help people to understand what the data means and translating it from data through to information and eventually knowledge and wisdom. So with that in mind, here are my details. Please email me at hello@datarelish.com. My name is Jennifer Stirrup, and it's been my pleasure to be with you here today. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And thank you to the team for hosting me as well. And I look forward to hearing from you. I do accept LinkedIn invites and Twitter followers. Obviously, I'm online a lot. I'm talking about the metaverse. I love this topic, and I think it's going to be so interesting to see how it develops. So I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much for your time today.